I do it? Because I can. Nice. Not thrilling, but nice. Okay. My Storybot's awake. Good to know. Good to know. I can't hear myself. There must be a reason for that. It's because my window has not refreshed. Is it really useful to be able to hear myself? Why is that? Because if I'm not hearing myself, how do I know if anyone else is hearing me? The only downside is if I run ads, I won't know because... Oh, well, good that you hear me. It's always fun when I just start out talking to myself when I start streaming. And congratulations on being first. Someday I'll get a prize for that. Pretty good. Trying to get myself back in the groove of doing the story reading. I missed last fairy tales, but I did get Sherlock Holmes last week. Though I have more people turn up when I'm playing video games than I do when I'm doing readings. Playing Fable 2 the last couple of times. So how's your week been, Sam? Still doing it. I do not know why it's cutting. Which is strange because I got the follower alert the other day and was actually surprised to hear it. It just keeps cutting off. I have no idea what's doing it. That one didn't even show up on the screen, did it? Show one of the points ones real quick. Oh, I have the point ones turned off. Duh. Okay. So that one's gonna work. I don't know. My sound alerts just cut off. It's crazy. Especially when I record. I think that they're good sound alerts. Again, I don't know why the sound alerts aren't working. I mean, it pops up and just cuts off. I don't know if it's just like peaking the sound or something, which I guess it could be doing. I think so. What sound alerts are just at? Turn it down a little, see if that does any better. Nope. I don't know what's causing it, because everything I've tried, I've reset everything, and just refuses to cooperate. Even if I'm playing a scary game, I won't notice it. Okay, now what's this one playing? What the hell? Try one of the other ones real quick. So that could just be a fluke. I don't have a noise gate. I don't have any other sound things on here other than what's installed on OSB. And now it played all of it. What the hell is sound alerts? Why is it so freaking random? Well, that one worked. Hmm. I don't know. Sound alerts is just weird. I'm gonna throw the ads on real quick, just to. Oh, it's not even gonna let me do. Well, fine, I won't do the ads. But yeah, that's one I put as well, it's not even so much not playing right away. It still takes a few seconds just because of their usual delay, but I hadn't been playing them at all. It'll just like do the first half second, then cuts off. And now, for some reason, it wants to play them again. So I don't know what's going on. It's weird. And that one played all of it too. My blurp's working. My blurp's not even showing the list. That's good. Oh, why does blurp send me out? Okay. It claims I'm signed in. That works. I'm trying to remember, do I have a sound alert set on? Okay, Blurps refuses to log in now. That's just... You don't own that ball. What is... There's so many of these Pokemon I don't even know anymore. I wonder why my blurps aren't connecting. Yeah, I caught it. Whatever it was. It's a Morlo. Look that one. Let's see. Okay. Number 755. Okay. Still don't know why blurp isn't working. It says to sign in. Yada yada yada. Get signed in. And still, my sound on there don't want to show up. Oh, now it says I'm signed in. Well, that's just a pain in the butt. Okay, that works. I think. Okay. Browser source is not. What the hell? It's on. Oh, there we go. Now it decides to connect. And it didn't play. Whatever. Go to study.
Need a voiceover artist? It's never been easier.
Sometimes you just gotta ride the wave and you gotta go along with it.
Over 19,200.
Blurp's being a pain.
100 voiceover services. Find the perfect voice today. Start now.
Okay, for some reason,
At Custom Ink, we can help you create custom products with a meaningful logo or
Anyway.
design to help you feel connected, whether you're all in one place or scattered across the country.
Is that?
Custom gear can contribute to a sense of community with team apparel and corporate gifts, increase employee retention by making people feel welcome, and help you
My audio track was playing ads. Oh, you can't see it because I've got the fireplace behind the book. But I've got the fireplace video going back there. Supposedly, it says it's trying to go. Oh, come on. There we go. Yeah, my fireplace. Which I was using the scene when I was doing my Christmas stuff, and I just wanted to copy it over, so. But that way I have the audio for the fireplace going on behind me. Though you can't see it. But welcome to the Scuff reading stream. Where we'll be reading more Sherlock Holmes. And I did turn off the sound alerts during the reading streams just because, well, I record these and repost them and such. And the jump scare during a Sherlock Holmes novel wouldn't go well. But anyway. Keep moving around on the camera. Move my fluffy tail back to the right side. Okay. Anyway, now that we're here and things are mostly working. First story for the night. The Stockbroker's Clerk. Shortly after my marriage, I had bought a connection in the Paddington district. Old Mr. Farquhar, whom I had purchased it, had at one time an excellent general practice, but his age and an affliction of the nature of St. Victus dance, from which he had suffered, had very much thinned it. The public not unnaturally goes on the principle that he who would heal others must himself be whole, and looks askance at the curative powers of those whose own case is beyond the reach of his drugs. Thus my predecessor weakened his practice, declined, until when I purchased it from him it had sunk from 1,200 to a little more than 300 a year. I had confidence, however, in my own youth and energy, and was convinced that in a very few years the concern would be as flourishing as ever. For 3 months after taking over the practice, I was kept very closely at work and saw little of my friend Sherlock Holmes, for I was too busy to visit Baker Street, and he seldom went anywhere himself save upon the professional business. I was surprised, therefore, when one morning in June, as I sat reading the British Medical Journal after breakfast, I heard a ring at the bell, followed by high, somewhat strident tones of my old companion's voice. "Ah, my dear Watson," said he, striding into the room, "I am very delighted to see you. I trust that Mrs. Watson is entirely recovered from the little excitements connected with our adventure of the Sinophore." "Thank you, we are both very well," I said, shaking him warmly by the hand. "And I hope also," he continued, sitting down by the rocking-chair, "that the cares of the medical practice have not entirely obliterated the interest you used to have in our little detective problems." "On the contrary," I answered. "It was only last night I was looking over my old notes and classifying some of our past results." "I trust that you don't consider our collection closed." "Not at all. I should wish nothing better to have much more of some experiences." "Today, for example?" "Yes, today, if you like." "And as far off as Birmingham?" "Certainly, if you wish it." "And the practice?" "I do my neighbour's when he goes. He is always ready to work off the debt." "Ha! Nothing could be better," said Holmes, leaning back in his chair and looking keenly at me from under his half-closed lids. "I perceive that you have been unwell lately. Summer colds are always a little trying." "I was confined to the house with severe chill for 3 days last week. I thought, however, that I had cast off every trace of it." "So you have. You look remarkably robust." "How, then, did you know of it?" "My dear fellow, I have my methods." "You deduce it?" "Certainly." "And from what?" "From your slippers." I glanced down at the new patent leathers which I was wearing. "How on earth—" I began, but Holmes answered my questions before it even ended. "Your slippers are new," he said. "You could not have had them for more than a few weeks. The soles which you are at this moment presenting to me are the slightest scorched. For a moment I thought they may have got wet and been burning in the drying. But near the instep there is a small circular wafer of paper with the Schumann's hieroglyphs written upon it. Damp would, of course, have removed this. You had, then, been sitting with your feet outstretched by the fire, which a man would hardly do even in so wet a June as this has been if he were in full health." Like all Holmes's reasoning, the thing seemed simplicity itself, when it was at once explained. He read the thought upon the features, and his smile had a tinge of bitterness. "I am afraid that I rather give myself away when I explain," said he. "Results without causes are much more impressive. You are ready to come to Birmingham, then?" "Certainly. What is the case?" "You shall hear it all on the train. My client is outside in a four-wheeler. Can you come at once?" "In an instant." I scribbled a note to my neighbour, rushed upstairs to explain the matter to my wife, and joined Holmes upon the doorstep. "Your neighbour is a doctor?" he said, nodding at the brass plate. "Yes, he brought the packet as I did." "An old established one?" "Just the same as mine. Both have been ever since the houses were built." "Ah, then you got hold of one of the best of the two." "I think I did. But how did you know?" "By the steps, my boy. Yours are worn 3 inches deeper than his. But the gentleman on the cab is my client, Mr. Hall Pycroft. Allow me to introduce you to him. Whip your horse up, cabby, for we have only just time to catch our train." The man whom I found myself facing was a well-built, fresh-complexioned young fellow, with a frank, honest face and a crisp, slight yellow moustache. He wore a very shiny top hat and a neat suit of sober black, which made him look what he was, a smart young city man, of the class whom we have labelled cockneys, but who give us a crack volunteer regiment and do turn out more fine athletes and sportsmen than any body of men in these islands. His round, ruddy face was naturally full of cheeriness, but the corners of his mouth seemed to me to be pulled down as half comical distress. It was not, however, until we were in the first-class carriage, as well as started upon our journey to Birmingham, that I was able to learn what the trouble was which he had been driven to Sherlock Holmes. "We have a clear run here for 70 minutes," Holmes remarked. "I want you, Mr. Hall Pycroft, to tell my friend your very interesting experience, exactly as you have told it to me, with more detail if possible. It will be of use to me to hear the succession of events again. It is the case, Watson, which may prove to have something in it, or may prove to have nothing, but which, at least, presents those unusual natural features which are dear to you as they are to me. Now, Mr. Pycroft, I shall not interrupt you again." Our young companion looked at me with a twinkle in his eye. "The worst of the stories," he said, "that I show myself up to such a confounded fool. Of course, it may work out all right, but I don't see that it could have done any better otherwise. But if I have lost my crib and get nothing of exchange, I shall feel what a soft Johnny I've been. I'm not very good at telling a story, Dr. Watson, but it is like this with me. I used to have a billet at Coxon and Woodhouse's of Draper Gardens, and they were let in the early of spring through the Venezuelan loan, as no doubt you remember, and came at a nasty copper. I've been with them 5 years, and old Croxon gave me a ripping good testimonial when the smash came. But of course, we clerks were all turned adrift, about 27 of us. I tried here and there were lots of other chaps on the same lay as myself, and it was a perfect frost for a long time. I had been taking £3 a week at Croxon's, and I had saved about 70 of them, but as soon as I worked my way through that and out at the other end, I was fairly at the end of my tether at last, and could hardly find the stamps to answer the advertisements or the envelopes to stick to them. I had worn out my boots paddling the office stairs, and I'd seemed just as far from getting a billet as ever. Unless I saw a vacancy at Watson's and Williams, the great stockbroking firm in Lombard Street. I dare say E.C. is not much of your line, but I can tell that this is the richest house in London. The advertisement was to be answered by letter only. I sent in my testimonial and application, but without the least hope of getting it. Back came an answer by return, saying that if I would appear the next Monday, I might take over my new duties at once, provided that my appearance was satisfactory. No one knows how these things are worked. Some people say that the manager just plunges his hand into a heap and takes out the first that comes. Anyhow, it was my innings that time, and I don't wish to feel ever better pleased. The screw was £1 a week rise, and the duties were about the same as the Croxons. And now I come out of the queer part of the business. I was in Dickings Hampstead Way, 17 Potter's Terrace. Well, I was sitting doing a smoke that evening after I'd been promised the appointment, when up came my landlady with a card which said Arthur Penner, Financial Agent, printed on it. I had never heard of the name before, and could not imagine what he wanted with me. But, of course, I asked her to show him up, and he walked, a middle-sized, black-bearded man with a touch of the sheeny about his nose. He had a brisk kind of way with him, and spoke sharply, like a man who knew the value of time. "Mr. High Palcreef, I believe," said he. "Yes, sir," I answered, pushing the chair towards him. "Lately engaged at Coxon and Woodhouse's?" "Yes, sir." "And now on staff at Mawson's?" "Quite so." "Well," said he, "the fact is that I have heard some rather extraordinary stories about your financial ability. You remember Parker, who used to be Coxon's manager? He can never say enough about it." Of course, I was pleased to hear this. I had always been pretty sharp in the office, but I had never dreamed that I was talked about in the city in this fashion. You have a good memory, said he. Pretty fair, I answered modestly. Have you kept in touch with the market while you've been out of work? He asked. Yes, I read the stock exchange list every morning. Now that shows real application, he said. That is the way to prosper. You won't mind me testing you, will you? Let me see. How are the shares? 106 and a quarter to 105 and 7/8. And New Zealand Consolidated, 104. And the British Broken Hills, 7 to 7 and 6. Wonderful, he cried as his hands up. This quite fits in with all that I'd heard. My boy, you are very much too good to be a clerk at Mawson's. The outburst rather astonished me, as you think. Well, said I, other people don't think quite so much of me as you might seem to do, Mr. Pinner. I had a hard enough fight to get this berth, and I'm very glad to have it. Poor man, you should soar above it. You're not in your true sphere. Now I'll tell you how it stands with me. What I have to offer is little enough when measured by your ability, but when compared to Mawson's, it's light to dark. Let me see. When do you go at Mars? On Monday. I would think I would risk a little sprite of flooding like you don't go there at all. Not go to Mawson's? No, sir. By that day you will be the business manager of Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited, with 134 branches in the towns and villages of France, not counting the one in Brussels and one in San Remo. This took my breath away. I never heard of it, said I. Very likely not. It has been kept very quiet, for the capital was all privately subscribed, and it's too good a thing to promote in public in. My brother, Harry Piner, is a promoter, and he joins the board after allotment to managing manager. He knew I was in swim down here, and asked me to pick up a few good men cheap. A young pushing man with plenty of snap about him. Parker spoke of you, and that brought me here tonight. We can only offer you a beggarly 500 to start with. 500 a year, I shouted. Only at the beginning, but you have to have an overriding commission and 1% on all business done by our agents, and you may take my word for it that this will come to more than your salary. But I know nothing about hardware. Tut, my boy, you know about figures. My head buzzed. I could hardly sit still in my chair, but suddenly a little chill of doubt came upon me. I must be frank with you, said I. Mawson only gives me 200, but Mawson is safe. Now, really, I know so little about your company that... Smart, he cried with a kind of ecstasy of delight. You're a very man for us. You're not to be talked over, and quite right, too. Now, here's a note for £100, and if you think that we can do business, you may just slip up in your pocket, and that's an advance upon your salary. That is very handsome, said I. When shall I take over my new duties? Be in Birmingham tomorrow at 1, he said. I have a note in my pocket here that says you will take it to my brother. You will find him at 126B Corporation Street, where the temporary offices of the company are situated. Of course, he must confirm your engagement, but between ourselves it will be all right. Really, I hardly know how to express my gratitude, Mr. Pinus, said I. Oh, not at all, my boy. You have only got your deserts. There will be one or two small things, mere formalities, which I must arrange with you, but you have a pen of paper beside you. Kindly write upon it, I am perfectly willing to act as business manager for the Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited at the minimum salary of £500. Well, I did as asked, and he put the paper in his pocket. There's one other detail, he said. What do you intend to do about Mawson's? I'd forgotten all about Mawson's in my joy. I'll write and resign, said I. Precisely what I don't want you to do. I had a row over you with Mawson's manager. I'd gone up to ask him about you, and he was very offensive, accusing me of coaxing you away from the service of the firm. And, that sort of thing. I fairly lost my temper. You want good men, you should pay them a good price, said I. He would rather have our small price than your big one, he said. Good, that's a promise, said he, rising from his chair. Well, I'm delighted to have got so good a man for my brother. Here's your advance of £100, and here's the letter. Make a note of the address, 126 Corporation Street, and remember that 1 o'clock tomorrow is your appointment. Good night, and may you have all the fortune that you deserve. That's just about all passed between us as near as I can remember. You can imagine, Dr. Watson, how pleased I was at such an extraordinary bit of good fortune. I sat up half the night 26B was a passage between two large shops, which led in a winding stone stair, and from which there were many flats. Led as offices, companies, and professional men. The names of the occupants were painted on the bottom of the wall, but there was no such name as Franco Midland Hardware Company, Limited. I stood for a few minutes with my heart in my boots, wondering whether the whole thing was an elaborate hoax or not, when up came a man and addressed me. He was very like the chap I had seen the night before, the same figure and voice, and he was clean-shaven and his hair was lighter. "Are you Mr. Hogg Pycroft?" he asks. "Yes," said I. "Oh, I was expecting you, but you are a trifle before your time. I had a note from my brother this morning in which he sang your praises very loudly." "I was just looking at the other offices when you came." "We have not got our name up yet, for we only secured the temporary premises last week. Come up with me, and we'll talk the matter over." I followed him right to the top of the lofty stair, and right under the slates were a couple of empty, dusty little rooms, uncarpeted and uncurtained, and to which he led me. I thought of a great office with shining tables and rows of clerks, such as I was used to, and I dare say I stared rather straight into the two deal chairs and one little table, which had a ledger and a wastepaper basket made up of the whole furniture. "Don't be disheartened, Mr. Pycroft," said my new acquaintance, seeing at the length of my face. "Rome was not built in a day, and we have lots of money at our backs, though we don't cut much dash in offices. Pray sit down and let me have your letter." I gave it to him, and he read it over very carefully. "You seem to have made a vast impression upon my brother Arthur," said he. "I now know that he is a little pretty shrewd judge. He swears by London, you know, and I by Birmingham. But this time I shall follow his advice. Pray consider yourself definitely engaged." "What are my duties?" I asked. "You will eventually manage a great depot in France, which will pour a flood of English crockery into the shops of 134 agents in France. The purchase will be completed in a week, and meanwhile you'll remain in Birmingham and make yourself useful." "How?" For answer, he took a big red book out of the drawer. "This is the directory of Paris," said he, "with the trades after the names of the people. I want you to take it home with you and mark off all the hardware sellers with their addresses. It would be of greatest use to me to have them." "Surely there are classified lists," I suggested. "Not reliable ones." Their system is different from ours. Stick at it, and let me have the list by Monday at 12. Good day, Mr. Pycroft. If you continue to show zeal and intelligence, you will find the company a good master. I went back to the hotel with the big book under my arm and very conflicting feelings about my breast. On one hand, I was definitely engaged and had £100 in my pocket. On the other, the look of the offices, the absence of the name on the wall, and the other of the points which would strike a businessman that left bad impressions in the position of his employers. However, come that night, I had the money, so I settled down to my task. All Sunday I was hard at work, and yet by Monday I'd only got as far as H. I went round to my employer, found him at the same dismantled kind of room, and was told to keep at it until Wednesday, and then come again. On Wednesday it was still unfinished, so I hammered away until Friday, that is, yesterday. Then I brought it round to Mr. Harry Primer. Thank you very much, said he. I fear that I underrated the difficulty of the task. This list will be a very material assistance to me. It took some time, said I. And now, said he, I want you to make a list of the furniture shops, for they all sell crockery. Ouch. Very good. And you can come up tomorrow evening at 7 and let me know how you're getting on. Don't overwork yourself. A couple hours a day. Sherlock Holmes rubbed his hands with delight, and I stared in astonishment at our client. You may well look surprised, Dr. Watson, but it is this way, said he. When I was speaking to the other chap in London, at the time that he laughed at my not going to Mawson's, I happened to notice that his tooth was stuffed in this very identical fashion. The glint of the gold in each of the case caught my eye, you see. When I put that with the voice and figure being the same, the only thing altered might have been changed by a razor or a wig, I could not doubt that it was the same man. Of course, you might expect two brothers to look alike, but not that way. They should not have the same tooth filled the same way. He bowed me out, and I found myself in the street, hardly knowing whether I was on my head or my heels. Back I went to the hotel and put my head in the basin of cold water and tried to think it out. Why had he sent me from London to Birmingham? Why had he got there before me? And why had he written a letter about himself to himself? It was altogether too much for me, and I could make no sense of it. Then suddenly it struck me that what was so dark might be very light to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I had just the time to get into town and night train to see you this morning, and bring you back with me to Birmingham. There was a pause after the stockbroker's clerk had concluded his surprising experience. Then Sherlock Holmes cocked his eye at me, leaning back on the cushions with a pleased and yet critical face, like a connoisseur who has just taken his first sip of a Comet vintage. Rather fine, Watson, is it not? Said he. And there are points in which pleases me. I think that you agree with me that the interview from Mr. Arthur Harry Pinner in the temporary offices of the Franco-Midland Hardware Company Limited would be a rather interesting experience for us both. But how can we get it? I asked. Oh, easily enough, said Hall Parcroft cheerily. You two are friends of mine who are in want of a billet, and what could be more natural than that I should bring you both round to our managing director? Quite so, of course, said Holmes. I should like to have a look at the gentleman and see if I can make anything of his little game. What qualities have you, my friend, which would make your services so valuable? Or is it possible that, He began biting his nails and staring blankly out the window. We hardly drew another word from him until we were at New Street. At 7 o'clock that evening, we were walking, the three of us, down Corporation Street to the company's offices. "There's no use of your being here before our time," said our client. "He only comes there to see me, apparently, for the place is deserted up to the very hour he names." "That is suggestive," remarked Holmes. "By Jove, I told you so!" cried the clerk. "That's he walking ahead of us." He pointed to a smallish, dark, well-dressed man who was bustling along the other side of the road. As we watched him, he looked across at the boy who was bawling to put out the latest edition of the evening paper and running over among the cabs and buses. He bought one from him. Then, clutching at his hand, he vanished through the doorway. "There he goes!" cried Pycroft. "There are the company's offices, to which he's gone. Come with me, and I'll fix up as easily as possible." Following his lead, we ascended 5 stories until we found ourselves outside the half-open door, at which our client was trapped. The voice within bade us enter, and we entered a bare, unfurnished room which was as Hall Pycroft had described. At a single table sat a man whom we had seen in the street, with his evening paper spread out in front of him, and as he looked up at us, he seemed to me that I had never looked upon a face which bore such marks of grief, or of something beyond grief, of a horror such as comes to few men in a lifetime. His brow glistened with perspiration, his cheeks were the dull, dead white of a fish's belly, and his eyes were wild and staring. He looked at his clerk as though he failed to recognize him, and I could see by the astonishment depicted upon our conductor's face that this was by no means the usual appearance of his employer. "You look ill, Mr. Pinner," he exclaimed. "Yes, I'm not very well," answered the other, making obvious efforts to pull himself together and licking his dry lips before he spoke. "Who are these gentlemen whom you have brought with us?" "One is Mr. Harris of Bermondsey, and the other is Mr. Price of this town," said our clerk glibly. "They're friends of mine and gentlemen of experience, but they have been out of the place for some time, and they hope that perhaps you might find an opening for them in the company's employment." Very possibly," cried Mr. Plummer with a ghastly smile. "Yes, I have no doubt that we shall be able to do something for you. What is your peculiar line, Mr. Harris?" "I'm an accountant," said Holmes. "Ah, yes, we shall want something of the sort. And you, Mr. Price?" "A clerk," said I. "I have every hope that the company may accommodate you, and I will let you know about it as soon as we come to any conclusion. And now I beg that you will go. For God's sake, leave me to myself." These last words were shot out of him as though the constraint which he was evidently setting upon himself had suddenly and utterly burst asunder. Holmes and I glanced at each other, and Hall Pycroft took a step towards the tables. "You forget, Mr. Pinner, that I am here by appointment to receive some directions from you," said he. "Certainly, Mr. Pycroft, certainly." The other assumed a calmer tone. "You may wait here a moment, and there is no reason why your friend should not wait with you. I will be entirely at your service in 3 minutes, if I might trespass upon your patience so far." He rose with a very courteous air, and bowing to us, passed out through the door at the farther end of the room, which he closed behind him. "Now what?" whispered Holmes. "Is he giving us the slip?" "Impossible," answered Pycroft. "Why so?" "That door leads to an inner room." "There is no exit?" "None." "Is it furnished?" "It was empty yesterday." "Then what on earth can he be doing? There's something which I don't understand in this matter. If ever a man was 3 parts mad with terror, that man's name is Piner. What can he have had puts the shivers on him?" "He suspects that we are detectives," I suggested. "That's it," cried Pryor. Holmes shook his head. He did not turn pale. He was pale when we entered the room. It was possible that... His words were interrupted by a sharp rat-tat from the other direction of the other door. "What the deuce is he knocking on his own door for?" cried the clerk. Again, a much louder rat-tat-tat. We all gazed expectantly at the closed door. Glancing at Holmes, I saw his face turn rigid, and he leaned forward in intense excitement. Then suddenly came a low gargling sound, and a brisk drumming upon woodwork. Holmes sprang frantically across the room and pushed at the door. It was fastened from the inner side. Following his example, we threw ourselves upon it with all our weight. One hinge snapped, then the other, and down came the door with a crash. Rushing over, we found ourselves in the inner room. But it was empty. But it was only for a moment that we were at fault. At one corner, the corner nearest the room which we had left, there was a second door. Holmes sprang to it and pulled it open. A coat and waistcoat were lying on the floor, and from a hook behind the door, with his own braces around his neck, was hanging the managing director of Franco Midland Hardware Company. His knees were drawn up, his head hung at a dreadful angle to his body, and the clatter of his heels against the door made the noise which had broken upon our conversation. In an instant I had caught him around the waist and held him up while Holmes and Pycroft untied the elastic bands which had disappeared between the livid creases of his skin. Then we carried him into the other room, where he lay with a clay-colored face, puffing his purple lips in and out with every breath, a dreadful wreck of all that had been for 5 minutes before. "What do you think of him, Watson?" asked Holmes. I stooped over him and examined him. His pulse was feeble and intermittent, but his breathing grew stronger, and there was a little shivering of the eyelids, which showed a little thin slit of white ball beneath. "It's been touch and go with him," said I, "but he'll live now. Just open that window and hand me the water carafe." I undid his collar and poured the cold water over his face, and raised and sank his arms until he drew a long, natural breath. "It's only a question of time now," said I as I turned away from him. Holmes stood by the table with his hands deep in his pockets, and his chin upon his breast. "I suppose we ought to call the police in now," said he. "And yet I confess that I'd like to give them a complete case when they come." "It's a blessed mystery to me," cried Pycroft, scratching his head. "Whatever they wanted to bring me all the way up here for, then—" "Pooh, it is all clear enough," said Holmes impatiently. "This is a sudden last move." "You understand it, then?" "I think it is rather obvious. What do you say, Watson?" I shrugged my shoulders. "I must confess that I am out of my depth," said I. "Oh, surely if you consider the events at first they can only point to one conclusion." "What do you make of them?" "Well, the whole thing hinges upon 2 points. The first is the making of Pycroft write declarations by which he entered the service of a prosperous company. Do you not see how very suggestive that is?" "I am afraid I missed the point." "Well, why did they want him to do it? Not a business matter, for these arrangements are usually verbal, and there's no earthly business reason why they should be an exception. Don't you see, my young friend, that they are very anxious to obtain a specimen of your handwriting, and had no other way to do it?" "And why?" "Quite so. Why? When they answer that we have made some progress with our little problem, why? There can be only one adequate reason. Someone wanted to learn to imitate your writing, and had to procure a specimen of it first. And now, if we pass on the second point, we find that each throws light upon the other. That point is a request made by Piner that you should not resign your place, but should leave your manager of this important business in the full expectation that Mr. Hall Pycroft, whom he had never seen, was about to enter the office upon Monday morning." "My God!" cried our client. "What a blind beetle I've been!" Blind beetle. Now you see the point of the handwriting. Suppose that someone turned up at your place and wrote a completely different hand from that which you had applied for the vacancy. Of course, the game would have been up. But in the interval, the rogue had learned to imitate you, and his position was therefore secure, as I presume that nobody in the office had ever set eyes upon you. Not so, cried Hall Pycroft. Very good. Of course, it was of most importance to prevent you from thinking better of it, and also keep you from coming into contact with anyone who might tell you the double was your work in Mawson's office. Therefore, they gave you a handsome advance on your salary, and ran you off to Midlands, where they gave you enough work to do to prevent you from going to London, where you might have burst a little game up. That is plain enough. But why should this man pretend to be his own brother? Well, that is pretty clear also. There are evidently only two of them in it, the others impersonating you at the office. This one acted as your engager, and then found that he could not find your employer without admitting a third person to the plot. That he was most unwilling to do. He changed his appearance as far as he could, and trusted that the likeness which you could not have failed to observe would be put down as a family resemblance. But for the happy chance of the gold stuffing, your suspicions would probably never have been aroused. Old Pycroft shook his clenched fist in the air. Good Lord, he cried. Well, I've been fooled by this way. What was the other Hall Pycroft doing in the Masons? What should we do, Mr. Holmes? Tell me what to do. We must wire to Mawson's. They shut at 12 on Sundays. Never mind, there will be some doorkeeper in attendance. Ah, yes, they do keep a permanent guard there on the account of the value of the securities that they hold. I remember hearing it talked of in the city. Very good. We shall wire him and see if all is well, and if a clerk of your name is working there. That is clear enough, but what is not clear is why, at sight of us, one of the rogues should instantly walk out of the room and hang himself. The paper, croaked a man behind us. The man sitting up, blanched and ghastly, with returning reason in his eyes, and hands which rubbed nervously at the broad red band which encircled his throat. The paper, of course, yelled Holmes in a paroxysm of excitement. Idiot that I was! I thought so much of our visits that the paper had never entered my mind in an instant. And to be sure, the secret must lie there. He flattened it out upon the table, and a cry of triumph burst from his lips. Look at this, Watson, he cried. It is a London paper, an early edition of the Evening Standard. Here is what we want. Look at the headlines. Crime in the City. Murder at Watson's and Williams. Gigantic attempted robbery. Capture of the criminal. Here, Watson, we are all equally anxious to hear, so kindly read aloud to us. It appeared at one position in the paper to have been one event of importance in its own, and the account of it ran rather this way. And a desperate attempt at robbery, culminating in the death of one man and the capture of the criminal, occurred this afternoon in the city. For some time back, Mawson and Williams, the famous financial house, have been the guardians of securities which amount to the aggregate of the sum of considerably over 1 million sterling. So conscientious was the manager of the responsibility which he devoted upon him, the consequence of great interest at stake, and safes of the very latest construction have been employed, and an armed watchman was left day and night in the building. It appears that last week a new clerk named Hall Pycroft was engaged by the firm. This person appears to have been none other than Bennington, the famous forger and cracksman, who, with his brother, has also recently emerged from 5 years' spell of penal servitude. By some means which are not yet clear, he succeeded in winning, under a false name, this official position in the office, which he utilized in order to obtain moldings of various locks, and thorough knowledge of the position of the strong room and of the safes. It is customary at Mawson's for the clerks to leave at midday on Saturday, Sergeant Tucson of the city police was somewhat surprised, therefore, to see a gentleman with a carpet bag come down the steps at 20 minutes past 1. His suspicions being aroused, the sergeant followed the man, and with the aid of Constable Pollock succeeded, after a most desperate resistance, in arresting him. It was clear at once that the darling and gigantic robbery had been committed. Nearly £100,000 worth of American railway bonds, with a large amount of crisp mines and companies, was discovered in the bag. On examining the premises, the body of the unfortunate watchman was found, doubled up and thrust into the largest of the safes, where it would not have been discovered until Monday morning, had it not been for the prompt action of the Sergeant Tucson. The man's skull had been shattered by a blow from the robber delivered from behind. There could be no doubt that Bennington had obtained entrance by pretending that he had left something behind, and having murdered the watchman, rapidly rifled through the large safe, and then made off with his booty. His brother, who usually works with him, has not appeared on this job, as far as can presently be attained, although the police are making energetic inquiries to his whereabouts. Well, we may solve the police a little trouble in that direction, said Holmes, glancing at the haggard figure huddled up in the window. Human nature is a strange mixture, Watson. You see that even a villain and murderer can inspire such affection that his brother turns to suicide when he learns that his neck is forfeited. However, we have no choices as to our actions. The doctor and I will remain on guard, Mr. Pycroft, if you will have the kindness to step out for the police. Oh. Stretch again. I stretched and hydrated during that pause a little while ago, but I'm doing it again anyway. Ouch. Whew. You okay? Sorry, I've got sound alerts turned off when I'm reading. If you want to try it again, we'll see if it works. I've been having trouble with those working anyway. Scream jump scare. Man, there are a lot of jump scares on here. Scream jump scare. That one. Maybe. Huh. Oh, wait, duh. Try that again. Maybe. Okay, there it is. That was loud. Yeah, welcome in. Hold on. Let's look right here. Okay. Ouch. Yeah, I'm going to turn off the sound alert again because I do record the stories. So, okay, one more switch. Okay. And our second story for the evening. The Gloria Scott. I have some papers here, said my friend Sherlock Holmes as we sat one winter's night on either side of the fire, which I really think, Watson, that it would be worth your while to glance over. These are the documents in the extraordinary case of the Gloria Scott, and this is the message which struck Justice of the Peace Trevor dead with horror when he read them. It picked from the drawer a little tarnished cylinder, and undoing the tape, he handed me a short note scrawled upon the half-sheets of slate-grey paper. The supply of game from London is steadily going up, it ran. Headkeeper Hudson, we believe, has now been told to receive all orders for flypaper, and for preservation of the hen pheasant's life. As I glanced up from reading this enigmatic message, I saw Holmes chuckling at the expression upon my face. You look a little bewildered, said he. I cannot see how such a message as this could inspire horror. It seems to me that rather grotesque than otherwise. Very likely, yet the fact remains that the reader, who was a fine, robust old man, was knocking clean down by it, as if he had been the butt of a pistol. You arouse my curiosity, said I. But why did you just now say that there's particular reasons why I should study this case? Because it was the first in which I was ever engaged. I often endeavored to elicit from my companion which had first turned his mind in the direction of criminal research, but had never caught him before in a communicative humor. Now he sat forward in his armchair and spread out the documents upon his knees. Then he lit his pipe and sat for some time smoking and turning them over. You never heard me talk of Victor Trevor? He asked. He was the only friend I made during the 2 years I was at college. I was never a very sociable fellow, Watson. Always rather fond of moping in my rooms and working out my own little methods of thought, so that I never mixed much with the men of my year. Bar fencing and boxing, I had few athletic tastes, and then my line of study was quite distinct from that of my other fellows, so that we had no points of contact at all. Trevor was the only man I knew, and that only through the accident of his bull terrier freezing upon my ankle one morning as I went down to the chapel. It was a prosaic way of forming a friendship, but it was effective. I was laid by the heels for 10 days, and Trevor used to come in to inquire after me. At first it was only a few minutes' chat, and soon his visits lengthened, and before the end of the term we were close friends. He was a hearty, full-blooded fellow, full of spirit and energy, the very opposite to me in most respects. But we had some subjects in common, and it was a bond of unison when we found that he was as friendless as I. Finally he invited me down to his father's place in Donenthorpe, in Norfolk, and I accepted his hospitality for a month of a long vacation. Old Trevor was evidently a man of some wealth and consideration, a J.P., and a landed proprietor. Donenthorpe was a little hamlet just in the north of Langmire, in the country of the Broads. This house was an old-fashioned, widespread oak-beamed brick building, with a fine lime-lined avenue leading up to it. There was excellent wild duck shooting in the fens, remarkably good fishing, and a small but select library, taken over, as I understand, from a former occupant, and a tolerable cook, so that he was a fastidious man who would not put a peasant's month there. Senior Trevor was a widower, and his only friend was his son. There had been a daughter, I heard, but she had died of diphtheria while on the vacation in Birmingham. The father interested me extremely. He was a man of little culture, but with considerable amount of rude strength, both physically and mentally. He knew hardly any books, but had travelled far, and had seen much of the world, and remembered all that he had learned. In person, he was a thick-set, burly man with a shock of grizzled hair, a brown, weather-beaten face, and blue eyes which were keen on the verge of fierceness. Yet he had a reputation for kindness and charity in the countryside, and was noted for the leniency of his sentences from the bench. One evening, shortly after my arrival, we were sitting over a glass of port after dinner, when young Trevor began to talk about those habits of observation and inference which I had already formed into a system, although I had not yet appreciated the part which they were to play in my life. The old man evidently thought that his son was exaggerating in his description of one or two trivial feats which I had performed. "Come now, Mr. Holmes," said he, laughing good-humouredly. "I am an excellent subject, if you can deduce anything from me." "I fear that there is not much," I answered. "I might suggest that you have gone about in fear for some personal attack within the past 12-month. The laugh faded from his lips, and he stared at me in great surprise. "Well, that's true enough," said he. "You know, Victor," turning to my son, "when we broke up that poaching gang, they swore to knife us, and Sir Edward Hawley has actually been attacked. I've always been on my guard since then, though I have no idea how you know it." "You have a very handsome stick," I answered. "By the description I observed that you had not had it for more than a year. But you have taken some pains to bore the head of it, and melted lead into the hole, as to make it a formidable weapon. I argued that you would not take such precautions unless you had some danger to fear." "Anything else?" he said, smiling. "You have boxed a good deal in your youth." "Right again, but how did you know this? Is my nose knocked a little to the side?" "No," said I, "it is your ears. They have a peculiar flattening and thickening which marks of a boxing man." "Anything else?" "You have done a good deal of digging by your calluses." "You made all my money in the goldfields." "You have been to New Zealand." "Right again." "You have visited Japan." "Quite true." "And you have been most intimately associated with someone whose initials are J.A., and whom you afterwards were eager to entirely forget." Mr. Trevor stood up slowly, fixed his large blue eyes upon me with a strange, wild stare, and then pitched forward with his face among the nutshells which strewed the cloth in a dead faint. You can imagine, Watson, how shocked both his son and I were. His attack did not last long, however, for when we undid his collar and sprinkled the water from one of our finger-glasses over his face, he gave a gasp or two and sat up. "Ah, boys," he said, forcing a smile, "I hope I haven't frightened you. Strong as I look, there is a weak place in my heart, and it does not take much to knock me over. I don't know how you manage this, Mr. Holmes, but it seems to me that all the detectives of fact and of fancy would be children in your hands. That's your line of life, sir, and you may take the word of a man who has been something of the world." And that recommendation, with the exaggerated estimate of my ability with which he prefaced it, was, if you can believe me, Watson, the very first thing it ever made me feel that a profession might be made out of what had up to the times been a merest hobby. At the moment, however, I was much too concerned at the sudden illness of my host to think of anything else. "I hope that I have not said anything to pain you," said I. "Well, you certainly touch upon a rather tender point. Might I know how and how much you know?" He spoke in a half-jesting fashion, but a look of terror still lurked in the back of his eyes. "It is simplicity itself," said I. "When you barred your arm to draw the fish into the boat, I saw that a J.A. had been tattooed in the bend of your elbow. The letters were still legible, but it was perfectly clear that their blurred appearance, and from some of the staining of the skin around them, that the efforts had been made to obliterate them. It was obvious, then, that those initials had once been very familiar to you, and that you had afterwards wished to forget them." "What an eye you have!" he cried with a sigh of relief. It is just as you say, but we won't talk of it. All the ghosts of our old loved ones are worst. Come into the billiard room and have a quiet cigar." Well, from that day, amid all his cordiality, there was always a touch of suspicion in Mr. Trevor's manner towards me. Even his son marked it. "You've given the governor such a turn," said he, "that he'll never be sure again of what you know and what you don't know." He did not mean to show it, I am sure, but it is so strongly in his mind that it peeped out in every action. At last I became so convinced that I had caused him some uneasiness that I drew my visits to a close. On the very day, however, before I left, an incident occurred which proved in the sequel to be of importance. We were sitting upon the lawn in the garden chairs, the three of us, basking in the sun and admiring the view across the Broads, when a maid came out to say that there was a man at the door who wished to see Mr. Trevor. "What is his name?" asked my host. "He would not give any." "What did he want?" "He says that you know him, and that he only wants a moment's conversation." "Show him round here." An instant afterwards, there appeared a little wizened fellow with a cringing manner and a shambling style of walking. He wore an open jacket with a splotch of tar on the sleeve, a red and black check shirt, dungaree trousers, and heavy boots that were badly worn. His face was thin and brown and crafty, with a perpetual smile upon it, which showed an irregular line of yellow teeth, and his hands crinkled or half closed in a way that is distinctive of sailors. As he came slouching across the lawn, I heard Mr. Trevor make a sort of hiccoughing noise in his throat, and jumping out of his chair, ran inside the house. He was back in a moment, and I smelt a strong reek of brandy as he passed me. "Well, my man," said he, "what can I do for you?" The sailor, looking at him with puckered eyes, and with the same loose-lipped smile upon his face. "You don't know me?" he asked. "Why, my dear, it is Shirley Hudson," said Mr. Trevor in a tone of surprise. "Hudson it is, sir," said the seaman. "Why, it's 30 year more since I saw you last. Here you are in your house, and me still picking my salt meat out of the harness cask." "Tut, you will find that I have not forgotten old times," cried Mr. Trevor, and walking towards the sailor, he said something in a low voice. "Go into the kitchen," he continued out loud, "and you will get food and drink. I have no doubt that I shall find you a situation." "Thank you, sir," said the seaman, touching his forelock. "I'm off just a 2-yearer and an 8-knot tramp, short-handed at that, and I wants a rest. I thought I'd get it either with Mr. Beddoes or with you." "Ah," cried Mr. Trevor, "you know where Mr. Beddoes is." "Bless you, sir, I know where all my old friends are," said the fellow with a sinister smile, and he slouched off after the maid into the kitchen. Mr. Trevor mumbled something to us about having been a shipmate with the man when he was going back to the Dungeons, and then, leaving us on the lawn, he went indoors. An hour later, when we entered the house, we found him stretched dead drunk upon the dining room sofa. The whole incident left us a most ugly impression on my mind, and I was not sorry the next day to leave Dothenthrop behind me, for I felt that my presence must be a source of embarrassment to my friend. All this occurred during the first month of the long vacation. I went up to my London rooms, where I spent 7 weeks, working out new experiments in organic chemistry. One day, however, when the autumn was far advanced, and the vacation was drawing to a close, I received a telegram from my friend imploring me to return to Donenthorpe, and saying that he was in great need of my advice and assistance. Of course, I dropped everything and set out to the north at once. He met me with the dog cart at the station, and I had glanced that the last 2 months had been very tiring ones for him. He had grown thin and careworn, and had lost the loud, cheery manner for which he had been remarkable. "The governor's dying," were his first words that he said. "Impossible!" I cried. "What is the matter?" "Apoplexy, a nervous shock. He's been on the verge all day. I doubt if we find him alive." It was, as you may think, Watson, horrified at this unexpected news. "What has caused it?" I asked. That's the point. Jump in and we can talk it over while we drive. You remember the fellow who came upon us that evening before you left?" "Perfectly." "Do you know who it was that he left into the house that day?" "I have no idea." "It was the devil, Holmes," he cried. I stared at him in astonishment. "Yeah, it was the devil himself. We have not had a peaceful hour since, not once. The governor's head is held up that evening, and now the life has been crushed out of him and his heart broken. All through this accursed Hudson." "What power had he, then?" That is what I would give so much to know. The kindly, charitable, good old governor. How could he have fallen into the clutches of such a ruffian? But I am so glad that you have come, Holmes. I trust very much your power of judgment and discretion, and I know you will advise me on the best." We were dashing along the smooth country road, with the long stretch of roads before us and the glimmering of the red light of the setting sun. From a grove upon our left, I could already see the high chimneys and flagstaff which marked the squire's dwelling. "My father made the fellow gardener," said my companion, "and then, as that did not satisfy him, he was promoted to butler. The house seemed to be at his mercy, and he wandered about and did what he chose. The maids complained of his drunken habits and his vile language. The dad raised wages all around to compensate for them for the annoyance. The fellow would take a boat and my father's best gun and treat himself to little shooting trips. And all this with such a sneering, leering, insolent face that I would have knocked him down 20 times over if he had been a man of my own age. I tell you, Holmes, I have had to keep a tight hold upon myself all this time, and now I am asking myself whether, if I'd let myself go a little more, I might have not been a wiser man." Well, all matters went from bad to worse with us, and this animal Hudson became more and more intrusive, until at last, when I was making some insolent reply to my father in my presence one day, I took him by the shoulders and turned him out of the room. He slunk away with a livid face and 2 venomous eyes which uttered more threats than his tongue could do. I don't know what passed between my poor dad and him after that, but my dad came to me the next day and asked me whether I would mind apologizing to Hudson. I refused, and you can imagine, and asking my father how he could allow such a wretch to take liberties with himself and his household. My boy," said he, "it is all very well to talk, but you don't know how I am placed. But you shall know, Victor. I'll see that you shall, and come what may. You wouldn't believe harm of your poor old father, would you, lad?" He was very much moved and shut himself up in the study all day, where I could see through the window that he was writing busily. That evening there came to me what seemed to be a grand release, for Hudson told me that we were going to leave us. We walked into the dining room as we sat after dinner and announced his intention into a thick voice of a half-drunken man. I've had enough of Norfolk, said he. I've run down to Mr. Beddoes in Hampshire. He'll be as glad to see me as you were, I dare say. You're not going away in an unkind spirit, Hudson, I hope, said my father with a tameness which made my blood boil. I have not had my apology, he said sulkily, glancing in my direction. Victor, will you acknowledge that you have used this fellow rather roughly, said the dad, turning to me. On the contrary, I think that we have both shown extraordinary patience towards him, I answered. Oh, do you? He snarled. Very good, mate. We'll see about that. He slouched out of the room, and half an hour left the house, leaving my father in a state of pitiable nervousness. Night after night I heard him pacing his room, and it was just that he was recovering his confidence that the blow did last fall. In a most extraordinary fashion, a letter arrived from my father yesterday morning, bearing a Fordingham postmark. My father read it, clasped his hands to his head, and began running round the room in little circles like a man who had been driven out of his senses. When I at last drew him down to the sofa, his mouth and eyelids were puckered to one side, and I saw that he had a stroke. Dr. Fordham came over at once. We put him to bed, but the paralysis has spread. He has shown no sign of recurring consciousness, and I think that we shall hardly find him alive. You horrify me, Trevor, I cried. What then could have been in this letter to cause a dreadful result? Nothing. There lies the inexplicable part of it. The message was absurd and trivial, and, my God, it is as I feared. As he spoke, we came round to the curve of the avenue, and I saw the fading light, that every blind in the house had been drawn down. As we dashed up to the door, my friend's face convulsed with grief. A gentleman in black emerged from it. When did it happen, Doctor? Asked Trevor. Almost immediately after you left. Did he recover consciousness? For an instant, right before the end. Any message for me? Only that the papers were in the back drawer of the Japanese cabinet. My friend ascended with the doctor to the chamber of death, while I remained in the study, turning the whole matter over and over in my head. And feeling that somber as ever I had done in my life, what was the past of this Trevor, pugilist, traveller, gold digger, and how had he placed himself in the power of this acid-faced man? Why, too, should he faint at an illusion of half-effaced initials upon his arm, and die of fright when he had a letter from Fordingham? Then I remembered that Fordingham was in Hampshire, and that this Mr. Beddoes, who was a seaman, had gone to visit, presumably to blackmail, had also been mentioned as living in Hampshire. The letter, then, might either come from Hudson, the seaman, saying that he had been betrayed the guilty secret, which appeared to exist, or it might come from Beddoes, warning an old confederate that such a betrayal was imminent. So far as it seemed enough, but then how could this letter be trivial and grotesque as described by the son? He must have misread it. If so, it must have been one of those ingenious secret codes which one thing, while they seem innocent, mean another. I must see this letter. If there was a hidden meaning to it, I was confident that I could pluck it forth. For an hour I sat pondering over it in the gloom, until at last a weeping maid brought in a lamp. Close at her heels came my friend Trevor, pale but composed, with these very papers which lie upon my knee held by this grasp. He sat down opposite me, and drew the lamp to the edge of the table, and handed me a short note scribbled, as you see, upon this single sheet of grey paper. The supply of game for London is going steadily up, it ran. Headkeeper Hudson, we believe, has been now told to receive all orders of flypaper, and for preservation of your hen pheasant's life. I dare say my face looked as bewildered as yours did just now when I first read the message. Then I reread it very carefully. It was evidently as I had thought, and some secret meaning must lie buried in the strange combination of words. Or could it be that there was a prearranged significance in such phrases as flypaper or hen pheasant? Such a meaning would be arbitrary, and could not be deduced in any way. And yet I was loath to believe that this was the case, and the presence of this word Hudson seemed to show that the subject of the message was as I had guessed, and that it was from Belos rather than the sailor. I tried it backwards, but the combination of fly pheasant's hen was not encouraging. Then I tried alternate words, but neither the of for nor supply game London promised to throw any light upon it. And then in an instant the key of the riddle was in my hands, and I saw every third word meaning with the first would give a message which might well delve old Trevor into despair. It was short and terse, the warning, as I now read it to my companion. The game is up. Hudson has told all. Fly for your life. Nice. Victor Trevor sank his face into his shaking hands. It must be that, I suppose, said he. This is worse than death, for it means disgrace as well. But what is the meaning of these headkeepers and hen pheasants? It means nothing to the message, but it might mean a good deal to us if we had no other means of discovering the sender. You see that he has begun writing, the game is, and so on. Afterwards, he had to fill the prearranged cipher. To fill in any two words in each space, he would naturally use the first words which came to mind, and if there were so many which referred to sport among them, you may be tolerably sure that this is either an ardent shot or interested in breeding. Do you know anything of this Meadows? Why, now that you mention it, he said, I remember that my poor father used to have an invitation to him to shoot over his preserves every autumn. Then it is undoubtedly from him that the note comes, said I. It only remains for us to find out what the secret which the sailor Hudson seems to have held over the heads of these two wealthy and respected men. Alas, Holmes, I fear that it is one of sin and shame, cried my friend. But from you I shall have no secrets. Here is a statement which was drawn up by my father when he knew that the danger from Hudson had become imminent. I found it in the Japanese cabinet, and he told the doctor, Take it and read it to me, for I have neither the strength nor the courage to do it myself. These are the very papers, Watson, which he handed to me, and I will read them to you as I read them in the old study that night time. There are endorsed outside, as you see, some particulars of the voyage of the bark Gloria Scott, from her leaving Falmouth on the 8th October, 1855, to her destruction in north latitude 15 degrees 20 seconds, west long 25 degrees 14 seconds, on the November 6th. It is in the form of a letter, and runs in this way. My dear, dear son, now that approaching disgrace begins to darken the closing of my years, I can write with all the truth and honesty that is not the terror of the law. It is not the loss of my position in the country, nor is it my fall from the eyes of all those who have known me, which cuts me to the heart. But it is that thought that you should have to blush for me, you who love me and have seldom, I hope, had reason to do so other than respect me. But if the blow falls which is forever hanging over me, then I shall wish you to read this, that you may know straight from me how far I have been to blame. On the other hand, if all should go well, which may kind God Almighty grant, then if by any chance this paper should still be undestroyed and should fall into your hands, I conjure you, by all you hold sacred, by the memory of our dear mother, and by the love which has been between us, to hurl it into the fire, and to never give it one thought. My heart is weak, be lying and my tongue sealed in death forever. In either case, the time of suppression is past. Every word which I tell you is the naked truth, and this I swear, as I hope for mercy. My name, dear lad, is not Trevor. I was James Armitage in my younger days, and you can understand now the shock that it is for me a few weeks ago, when your college friend addressed me in words which seemed to imply that I had surprised my secrets. As Armitage, it was I entered the London banking house, and as Armitage, I was convicted of breaking the country's laws, and was sentenced to transportation. Do not think very harshly of me, laddie. It was a debt of honour, so which I had to pay, and I used money which was not my own to do it, and the certainty that I could replace it before there could be any possibility of it being missed. But the most dreadful ill luck pursued me. The money which I had reckoned upon never came to hand, and my premature examination of accounts exposed my deficits. The case might have been dealt leniently with, but the laws were more harshly administered 30 years ago than they are now, and on my 23rd birthday I found myself chained as a felon for 37 of the convicts in the between decks of the bark Gloria Scott, bound for Australia. It was 55 years ago when the Crimean War was at its height, and the old convict ships had been largely used as transports in the Black Sea. The government was compelled, therefore, to use smaller and less suitable vessels for sending out their prisoners. The Gloria Scott had been a Chinese tea trade, and was an old-fashioned, heavy-bowed, broad-beamed craft, and the new clippers had cut her out. She was 500-ton boat, and besides her 38 jailbirds, she carried 26 of a crew, 18 soldiers, and a captain, 3 mates, a doctor, a chaplain, and 4 warders. Nearly 100 souls were in her, all told, when we set out for Falmouth. The partitions between the cells of the convicts, instead of being of thick oak, as the usual convict ships, were quite thin and frail. The man next me upon the aft was whom I had particularly noted when we were led out of the quay, was a young man with a clean, hairless face, a long, thin nose, and rather nutcracker jaw. He carried his head very jauntily in the air, had a swaggering style of walking, and was, above all else, remarkable for his extraordinary height. I don't think any of our heads would have come up to his shoulder, and I am sure that he could not have been measured less than 6.5 feet. It was strange among so many sad and weary faces to see one which was full of energy and resolution. I was glad, then, to find that he was my neighbor, and gladder still in the dead of the night when I heard the whisper close to my ear, and found that he had managed to cut an opening in the board which separated us. "Hello, chummy," said he. "What's your name, and what are you in for?" I answered him, and turned who I was talking with. "I'm Jack Pendergrass," he said, "and by God, you'll learn to bless my name before I've done with you." I remembered hearing of this case, for it was one which had made an immense sensation throughout the country for some time before my own arrest. He was a man of good family and of great ability, but of incurably vicious habits, who had, by an ingenious system of fraud, obtained huge sums of money from the leading London merchants. "Ha ha! You remember my case," he said proudly. "Very well indeed. Then maybe you remember something queer about it." "What was that, then?" "I had nearly $250,000, hadn't I?" "So it said. But none was recovered?" "No." "Well, where do you suppose the balance is?" asked. "I have no idea," said I. "Right between my finger and thumb," he cried. "By God, I've had more pounds in my name than you've had hairs on your head."
And if you've had money, my son, and know how to handle it and spread it, you can do anything. Now, you don't think it likely that a man who could do anything is going to wear his breeches and sitting in a stinking hole in a rat-gutted, beetle-ridden, moldy old coffin of chin-chin coaster? No, sir. Such a man will look after himself and will look after his chums. You may lay to that. You hold on to him, and you may kiss the book that he'll haul you through. That was his style of talk, and at first I thought it meant nothing. But after a while, when he had tested me and sworn me with all the possible solemnity, he let me understand that there really was a plot to gain control of the vessel. A dozen of the prisoners had hatched it before they came aboard. Prendergast was the leader, and his money was the motive power. I had a partner, he said, a very good man, as true as a stock to a barrel. He's got the dibs, he has. And where do you think he has at this moment? Well, he's the chaplain of this ship. The chaplain, no less. He came aboard with a black coat and his papers, right? And enough money to buy his box and things right up to the main keel haul. The crew were his, body and soul. You couldn't buy him at such a gross with a cash discount. And he did it before they ever even signed on. He's got two of the warders and the mercer, second mate, and he'd have the captain himself if he thought it was worth it. What are we to do then? I asked. What do you think? He said. We'll make the coast of some of the soldiers redder than ever the tail we did. But they're armed, I said. And so shall we be, my boy. There's a brace of pistols for every mother's son of us. And if we can't carry the ship, the crew's at our back. It's time we were all sent to young Mrs. boarding school. You speak to your mate upon the left tonight and see if he's ready to be trusted. I did so and found my other neighbor to be a young fellow in much the same position as myself, whose crime had been forgery. His name was Evans, but he afterward changed it, like myself, and he is now a rich and prosperous man in the south of England. He was ready enough to join the conspiracy, and only means by our saving ourselves, and before we had crossed the bay there were only two of the prisoners which were not in the secret. One of these was a weak mind, and we did not dare to trust him. The other was suffering from jaundice, and could not be of any use to us. From the beginning, there was really nothing to prevent us from taking possession of the ship. Its crew were a set of ruffians, specially picked for the job. The sham chaplain came to our cells to extort us, carrying a black bag exposed to be full of tracts. And so often did he come that by the third day we each had stowed away our foot over beds of file, a brace of pistols, and a pound of powder and 20 slugs. Two of the warders were agents of Prendergast, and the second mate was his right-hand man. The captain and the two mates, two warders and Lieutenant Martin, his 18 soldiers, and the doctor were all that we had against us. Yet, safe as it was, we determined to neglect no precaution, and to make our attack suddenly by night. It came, however, more quickly than we expected, and in this way. One evening, about the third week after our start, the doctor had come down to see one of the prisoners, who was ill, and putting his hand down the bottom of his bunk, felt the outline of the pistols. If he had been silent, he might have blown the whole thing. But he was a nervous chap, so he gave a cry of surprise and turned so pale that the man knew what was up in an instant and seized him. He was gagged before he could give the alarm and tied down upon the bed. He had unlocked the door that led to the deck, and we were through in a rush. The two sentries were shot down, and so was the corporal who came running to see what was the matter. There were two more soldiers at the door of the stateroom, and their muskets seemed not to be loaded, for they never fired upon us, and they were shot while trying to fix their bayonets. Then we rushed to the captain's cabin, but as we pushed the door open to the other side, an explosion from within. There he lay with his brains smeared on the chart of the Atlantic, which was pinned upon the table, while the chaplain stood with a smoking pistol in his hand at the elbow. The two mates had been seized by the crew, and the whole business seemed to be settled. The stateroom was next to the cabin, and we flopped in there and flopped down on the settees, all speaking and together, for we were just mad with a feeling that we had just been freed. There were lockers all about. Wilson, the Sam chaplain, knocked one of them, and piled a dozen of brown sherry. We cracked off the necks of the bottles and poured the stuff into our tumblers, and we just tossed them about in an instant without warning. There came a roar of muskets to our ears, and the saloon was full of smoke that we could not see across the table. When it cleared again, the place was in shambles. Wilson and the 8 others were wriggling on the top of each other on the floor, and the blood and this brown sherry on the table turned to make me sick to think of it. We're so cowed by this sight that to think that we should have been given up the job if it had not been for Prendergast, who bellowed like a bull and rushed forward the door. All that were left at his heels. Out we ran, and there on the poop deck were the lieutenant and 10 of his men. The swinging skylights above the saloon had been a bit open, and they had fired on us through the slit. We got on them before they could load, and they stood it like men. But we had the upper hand of them, and in 5 minutes it was all over. My God, there was even a slaughterhouse like that ship. Prendergast was raging like the devil, and he picked up soldiers as if they had been children and threw them overboard alive or dead. There was one sergeant that was horribly wounded and kept swimming for a surprising time until someone in mercy blew out his brains. When the fighting was over, there was nowhere left of enemies except for the warders, the mates, and the doctor. It was over them that the great quarrel arose. There were many of us who were glad enough to win back our freedom, and yet who had no wish to murder on their souls. It was one thing to knock the soldiers over with their muskets in their hands, but it was another to stand by while men were killed in cold blood. 8 of us, 5 convicts and 3 soldiers, said that we would not see it done, but there was no moving Prendergast and those who were with him. Our only chance of safety lay in making a clean job of it, said he, and he would not leave his tongue in the power of the wag of the witness box. It nearly came to our sharing the fate of the prisoners, but at last he said that if we wished, we might take the boat and go. We jumped at the offer and were already sick of the bloodthirsty doings, and we saw that there would be worse before it was done. We were given a suit of sailor togs each, a barrel of water, 2 casks, one of the junk and one of the biscuits, and a compass. Prendergast threw us a chart and told us we were shipwrecked mariners, whose ship would flounder latitude 15 degrees and longitude 25 degrees west, then cut the painter and let us go. And now I come to the most surprising part of my story, dear son. The seamen had hauled the foreyard back during the rising, but now we were left and brought it square again. And as there was light wind from the north and east, the bark began to draw slowly away from us. Our boat lay, rising and falling, among the long, smooth rollers, and Evans and I, who were the most educated in the party, were sitting in the sheets working at our position, and planning what coast we should make for. It was a nice question, for the Cape Verdes was about 500 miles to the north of us, and the African coast was about 700 to the east. On the whole, as the wind was coming about the north, we thought that Sierra Leone might be best, and turned our head that direction. The bark being at that time nearly hull down in a starboard quarter. Suddenly, as we looked at her, we saw a dense black cloud of smoke shoot up from her, which hung like a monstrous tree upon the skyline. A few seconds later, the roar like thunder burst upon our ears, and as the smoke thinned away, there was no sign left of the glorious sky. In an instant, we swept the boat's head around again and pulled with all our strength for the place that the haze was still trailing over the water marked the scene of the catastrophe. It was a long hour before we reached it, and at first we feared that we might come too late to save anyone. A splintered boat and a number of crates and fragments, the spars rising and falling on waves, showered us like the vessel had been floundered. But there was no sign of life, in which we had turned away in despair when we heard a cry for help, and saw at some distance a piece of wreckage with a young man lying across it. When we pulled him aboard, he proved to be a young seaman of the name of Hudson, who was burned and exhausted, and that he could give us no account of what had happened until the following morning. It seemed that after we had left, Prendergast and his gang had proceeded to put to death the 5 remaining prisoners. 2 warders had been shot and thrown overboard, and so also the 3rd mate. Prendergast then descended into the 'tween decks, and with his own hands cut the throat of the unfortunate surgeon. There only remained the 1st mate, who was a bold and active man. When he saw the convict approaching him with a bloody knife in his hand, he kicked off his bonds, which had somehow contrived to loosen, and rushing down the deck, he plunged into the afterhold. A dozen convicts, who descended with their pistols in search of him, found him with a matchbox in hand, seated between an open barrel of powder, which was one of 100 carried on the ship. And swearing that he would blow up all hands if they were in any way molested. An instant later, the explosion occurred, though Hudson thought it was caused by a misdirected bullet from one of the convicts rather than the mate's match. Be the cause of what it may, it was the end of the Gloria Scott and of the rabble who held command of her. In such a few words, my dear boy, is the history of the terrible business in which I was involved. Next day we were picked up by the brig Hotspur, bound for Australia. Whose captain found no difficulty in believing that we were the survivors of a passenger ship which had floundered. The transport ship Gloria Scott was set down by the Admiralty as lost at sea, and no word has ever leaked out about her true fate. After an excellent voyage, the Hotspurs landed at Sydney, where Evans and I changed our names, and we made our way to the diggings, where, among the crowds who were gathered from all nations, we had no difficulty losing our former identities. The rest I need not relate. We prospered, we traveled, we came back as rich colonials to England, and we bought our country estates. For more than 20 years we have led peaceful and useful lives, and we hoped that our past was forever buried. Imagine then my feelings when the seaman who came to us recognized instantly the man who had picked off the wreck. He had tracked us down somehow, and had set himself upon our lives to deliver our fears. You understand now how it was that I strove to keep peace with him, and you will in some measure sympathize with me in the fears which fill me, now that he has gone from me to his other victim upon threats of his tongue. Underneath is written in a hand so shaky that it is hardly legible. Beddoes writes in cipher to say H has told all. Sweet Lord, have mercy on our souls. That was the narrative which I read that night to young Trevor, and I think, Watson, that under the circumstances it was a dramatic one. A good fellow was heartbroken at it, and went out to the Terai tea planting, where I hear that he does well. As to the sailor and Beddoes, neither of them was ever heard of again after that day on which the letter of warning was written. They both disappeared utterly and completely. No complaint has been lodged with the police, so that Beddoes had mistaken the threat for a deed. Hudson had been seen lurking about, and it is believed by the police that he has done away with Beddoes and had fled. For myself, I believe that the truth was exactly the opposite. I think that it is most probable that Beddoes, pushed to desperation and having believed himself having already been betrayed, had revenged himself upon Hudson, and had fled from the country with much money as he could lay his hands on. Those are the facts of the case, Doctor, and if they are of any use to your collection, I'm sure they are very heartily at your service. And I don't know if it was just my computer or not, but the video looks horrible. Hopefully didn't show up that way, but if I will, I'll have to use my recording rather than the stream. A wallet much less. Anyway. I would go into a third story, but with Sherlock Holmes stories go, I'm doing good to get 2 done tonight, so. I see a couple of friends that are on right now. Question is, which one do I raid? Sophia only has 7. I also don't know how long she's been on. See how long she's been running. Okay. Sophia has only been on about an hour, so we will raid her. Because why not? So, those are the raid messages. And we will raid Sophia. She's reading Emerald City of Oz. Nice. Let's see. Sophia Ignacy. Spelled it right. Cool. Anyway, I would like to thank you all for coming in for another night of Sherlock Holmes. Hopefully, I will be up to reading fairy tales tomorrow, depending on how the day goes. So I will say good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whichever it may be for you, and I will hopefully see you then. So, have fun listening to Sophia, or Dusk. I'll probably go lurking her too. Well, have